Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and warm welcome to everybody for our Palmerston City Council extraordinary meeting for Monday, the 10th of June 2024. Before we start proceedings, if I could ask the Deputy Mayor to open with karakia.
Morena, Your Worship, o tira tēnā koutou katoa, ngā kai kaunihira me ngā kai mahi. Morena, everyone. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tēnā koutou. Thank you, Your Worship.
Kia ora, thank you. Right, we'll go to just our housekeeping first, and just explain that the meeting's being recorded. It's been live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety procedures, unlike the event of an emergency on hearing the alarm, we will leave through the entrances with the green signs to evacuate to the assembly area, which is the clock tower, Te Maraehine, the square. It's a non-smoking and vaping facility, and again, unlike the event of a defibrillator required, that's on the ground floor at the customer services entrance. Toilets as you entered the link span. Any near misses, please, or incidences, please let our administration know. Okay, we'll go to our number 2 in our order paper, which is apologies. And we have Councillor Johnson as an apology. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there's no other commentary, we'll vote, please. As passed, 15 votes for and none against. Notification of additional items. There are none, and there's nothing from the floor. Declarations of interest. Again, I haven't received any. Is there anything from the floor? No. Public comment. There is no public comment. And we'll get into the confirmation of the minutes. And there's two there, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting of the 29th of May 24 part 1 public be confirmed as a true and correct record. As we have people that were in some and weren't in others, so I'll move the first one, and I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wood. Are there any matters arising from that meeting? There being none, we will vote, please. Councillor Dennison, have you voted? Yep. Okay, it's passed, 15 votes for, none against. Our second recommendation is around the minutes of our other meeting, ordinary council meeting of the 5th of June 2024, part 1 public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Again, are there any matters arising from those? There being none, we will vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this the report from last week? Just confirming.
It's the minutes.
Yeah, the minutes. Just for transparency and the integrity of the decision-making process, I've asked the CEO if we could be provided a further breakdown of the cost quotes from the contractor for the repositioning of the bus stops, because they seem significant sums, and there was last-minute changes that were presented to just prior to the deliberations, and I wanted to know how come the price quotes were so significantly different in those cases, and why was it presented just prior to the deliberations if it was known earlier? So I've inquired about that, so for the record, I wanted to put that on the table, and the response will be that it will come through subsequently, but I'll follow that through accordingly. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other matters arising? Okay, we'll vote. As passed, 15 votes for and none against. All right, thank you. We'll move through to number 8 and our major part of the meeting, which is around confirming the proposed 24 long-term plan for audit. And there's an attachment there, a significant actually, around under separate cover around supporting information. So if I can ask David Murphy, Cameron Mackay and Chris Dyberg to come forward to present that, please. Page 49 of your papers.
Morena koutou, just on behalf of the team, we'll just briefly introduce the paper. The reality is the further along the process we go, the less there is to say really. So we've summarised the changes that you'd made during deliberations. We've provided detail on the 2 debt repayment options. There's a recommendation and some commentary there asking you to have another think about the decision regarding nature calls. In terms of next steps, after today it will go to Audit New Zealand and then it will be finalised and brought back for final approval on the 26th of June. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David. All right, we'll open it up. And, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, team. I'm pretty perplexed by Table 4 on page 54, if I was able to ask some questions on that. So we consulted on a 103% rate rise over the 10-year period, and this table suggests that we will have a 108% rate rise over the 10-year period. I can't understand when elected members removed $139 million from the capital program and reduced multiple operational spending programs that we could possibly be in a position where we would be increasing the rates by 5% more than what we consulted on over the 10 years. So could officers explain to me which elected member decisions led to that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I couldn't point specifically to one specific decision, Councillor, but what I could say is a number of the decisions that were made were deferrals of programs out. So you'll see that you'll see where some of those interest decisions are probably starting to hit later on now than what they were originally in the draft 10-year plan. Of course, when we do defer programs from 1 year out to 3 years, the inflation assumptions start to kick in as well. So that's possibly what's driving some of that, is the underlying inflation assumptions around when we do defer out in years.
Okay. Are there any other additions to the operational expenditure in the budget that elected members haven't been made aware of? For example, we know insurance has increased, but has that been budgeted across the whole length of the plan? Could that be what's driving it, or?
Insurance has been, assurance increase that we discussed during deliberations applies across the 10-year plan. So the increase in year one is budgeted, and then after it's inflated across the 10 years.
Okay. Okay, I'll ask a question on a different note then. So over the page, on page 57, under point 7.3, regarding the nature calls update, there's a comment in here that says that a possible cap of $400 million would restrict council to looking at only one option. Appreciating that, my understanding was we would look at what our options are, and if it came out that there was only one, well, that would be the case. But as it says, there's potentially only one, there's quite possibly others. Why is that reason for us to make a change now when we haven't looked at what the other options are?
Chris Dyberg, Chief Infrastructure Officer. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, look, I suppose part of what we're trying to do here is to get real clarity about exactly what the intent is sort of going forward. But if you sort of read the strict interpretation of the recommendations that come through, it basically, we believe it would limit us to only looking at options that were within that dollar amount, which really is only looking at one option. So I guess, look, at the end of the day, our intent is to go and have a look at all of the options that were on the table at that time, assess whether there's some changes to some, whether there's some new ones that we could look at, and basically be free to come back and give you a full sort of range of options and issues.
Okay, and final question then, as an elected member who wasn't here through the process that we went through to get to that BPO option, would you be able to outline to me what the concerns are regarding the potential one option that you're mentioning? I've never had any explanation of what the problem might be with that option, so I just thought I'd get an understanding.
I don't think we're saying necessarily there's any particular problems with that per se. It's definitely not the current BPO option.
Okay.
But we're just saying it would limit us to only looking at one option.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just on that, Chris, also it's around being consentable as well, isn't it? Some of those options in the current RMA, the current standing, would not get a consent, I understand, including possibly one of the options that we were just speaking about.
I think that's right. I think there is, it is a changing environment that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, I realise that now.
But today, I think you're dead right.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in part, the question was answered, but I just want to seek some comment from you just in terms of the CapEx, and it's the table 1. The CapEx by year 4, we add another 100 million to the CapEx projected expenditure, and then by year 7 we are at $269 million. So can I please have some commentary around the achievability of that program going forward, please?
Through Mr. Chair, I guess I would say make very similar comments as made a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this, and within that program, there's some of the things that are in that year 7, some very big dollar amounts, but they're not necessarily a whole lot of more programs. So if you look at, just start by looking at the next 3 years, even though and it's changed a little bit over the, with this, where we've landed, but it was stepping up. The number of projects wasn't necessarily stepping up that much. We had the similar sort of projects. I think when you're looking at that year 7 and saying, well, you're not necessarily going to have 2.5 times as many projects as we have now. You will have probably a similar amount, maybe a few more, but they're quite big. Now, when it comes to some of those big and more complex projects, then we will take a very bespoke approach to how we deliver them. That's likely to be outsourcing or getting some additional support to run those programs. So we're not relying on our internal resources to deliver a program of that size. We're taking a very managed approach to it.
Yep. If I just take your answer there, when you're saying that you add some additional capacity to be able to manage that, are you talking about consultants?
Yes, most likely all contractors, yeah. Or you basically take a procurement approach to it. So we might have some internal project management, let's say, but we will effectively outsource, a package that may include the actual sort of day-to-day project management as well. So we effectively, rather than the way that we might do things today, is that we will say go to market for someone to build something, and then we effectively project manage all of those inputs ourselves. So for a big project, we wouldn't take that approach. We would, get a big project management company. We would probably have QS involved. You might have a whole lot of things, and that way is how you would de-risk the delivery of that program or individual project.
So the complexities that comes with such a large program going out, have we included that into budgets to support that?
They're sort of implicitly included within the capex for it. So when you're doing something like that, you are capitalising all of that resource. It's the same with today. Do our PMO, for instance, is the vast majority of costs that come with a PMO is capitalised. It's included as part of a project cost. So there's very little additional operational costs associated with that because it's all. So when we do the numbers, we assume an overhead around project management, for instance.
Okay. All right. Just really my last question really is, do you feel comfortable that there is industry capacity to be able to manage that significant parcel of work that we've pushed out to out years?
It's probably hard to answer what would happen in 7 years' time. So I probably couldn't give you 100% assurance. But I guess what I would say is that the way that we're going to try and de-risk our delivery program is to have a much longer term view around some of these things so that we're looking for and securing some of those resources a lot further out so that we can be able to signal and give the industry an opportunity to gear up for it.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Mayor, just one more question. So in terms of, you've talked about de-risking things. So when the LTP actually goes through to audit, are we actually going to perhaps just indicate that this capital program going through year 4 particularly to year 7, that might cause some issues for us?
If anything, I was probably going to say that certainly in the short term, the change that we've made is probably de-risked it more because we've actually, I guess it's the more immediate program that's the one that we're more worried about. So, I'd be stretching the truth if I said we had a firm plan for what we're going to do in year 7. So really it's one of those things that, you're probably a few years out, you're probably starting to look at that and planning for it. But certainly we're not looking at coming up with detailed plans around what we're going to do in year 7 yet. I guess we're just looking at what's in there and, as a team we can look at it and say, yeah, we'll find a way to make that work.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question relates to the recommendation 1A to rescind a resolution that was confirmed by council at the recent meeting. This question might be for governance. Under our standing orders, in terms of any request for council to revoke or alter any previous resolution, Standing Order 2.24.4 requires at least 2 working days' notice of the meeting must be given to members accompanied by details of the proposal to be considered. Now, I didn't get these papers till Friday afternoon and was not aware of any request to rescind that decision until I received those papers. I'm just wondering if that meets the requirement for at least 2 days, 2 working days notice for that request.
I'll let governance speak to it, but I understand we're in an extraordinary meeting.
That doesn't,
not a full council meeting, so.
that doesn't change anything.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillor is correct in the standing order that she's referring to. So the request to rescind is under the standing order, that Councillor Naylor referred to. The request was indicated verbally to you on Wednesday. So the Chief Executive spoke to the Council and indicated his intention to bring information, particularly on this item, to this meeting. Also on Wednesday, you resolved by resolution to hold an extraordinary meeting, knowing that in doing so you would not receive your normal 2 days' notice. So, yeah, that's the background that you're working under.
Thank you. Can I just ask further to that? The next standing order does talk about when a motion has been considered and rejected by council, that no similar motion may be accepted within 6 months unless signed by not less than 1/3 of all members. And obviously that's not happened in this case either. I'm just wondering, I didn't hear any verbal, I wasn't here for any verbal indication on Wednesday. I'm just wondering the timeframes, whether this is actually acceptable under our standing orders to be considered today.
Mr Mayor, can I speak to that?
Yep, sure, I was going to as well, because I didn't say that a lot of other members hear things, but that's fine.
Would you like to speak first? The second standing order is not relevant to this issue, because the statement of what the Chief Executive is suggesting you might want to consider today was not voted on at your previous meeting. So it's not something that's that was voted on and failed, in which case the standing order that you just referred to applies. It was put up, but it was amended, so you never actually voted against this particular motion.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll move on to my other questions. Thanks for that clarification. In terms of...
Voting, is it 75 or 50?
Oh, sorry, just one further question to that. Is it clear... I couldn't see it clarified in standing orders whether it required a 75% or 50% vote. It wasn't explicit on that in that particular clause. Where would we get our guidance for that in a circumstance such as this? The clause prior to that required a 75% vote for that to be anything to be revoked or altered if it's at the same meeting, but it's not specific about at a future meeting. What percentage is required?
Correct. The 75% is only explicitly applied when it's at the same meeting. So there's no reference in the standing orders to whether it needs to be 50 or 75.
So what's our default? What's
A
our
majority vote.
And that's based on?
It not otherwise being explicitly stated in the standing orders.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have got some other questions, if that's okay. Sorry, just get to my papers. So on page 53 of our agenda, under 3.8, the policy limit for annual increases in rates has got those three components: the additional rates from growth, the 2%, and then it's plus increase in funding required for interest and debt repayment. I was aware that that used to be required for debt repayment. Has the interest component always been there, or is that a new aspect of that policy?
Mr Mayor, those three items that you've just outlined, Councillor, is what we went out and consulted on.
Right, okay. Thank you. In terms of, excuse me, our supporting information, where in our supporting information would we find whole of council activity statements? Excuse me. Summary. It's quite a long document and I couldn't find it there. In the document, in the activity statements that we consulted on, it had a summary of whole of council for that. And in terms of trying to understand where we've arrived at, that Councillor Woods already alluded to, that our rates overall, the 10 years, are actually higher than what we consulted on, despite a number of reductions. And wanting to understand that, it's quite difficult to compare what we consulted on without being able to look at that whole of council activity statements. Have I missed it somewhere, or is it not in there?
Morning all, Scott Mantz, Finance Manager. The whole of council funding impact statement is on page 302 of the additional information, which is the one to compare back to the consultation information.
Yeah, thank you. I did find the funding impact statements there, but that's quite a different format to the activity statements, which is in our document that we consulted on was at the beginning of the activity reports. It was whole of council activity statements, so it's quite a different format than the funding impact statements.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I've just had whispered in my ear that we are missing that whole of council activity statement page. It should be in front of the housing activity financials, which are...
That's where I was looking for it, but couldn't find it.
Yeah, so that's been an error of omission for that statement.
So when would we be able to have a look at that so that we can gain an understanding of what's driving such a change from what some of us were expecting when we came to this meeting?
We could email that out as soon as we are able to.
Thank you. And looking at page 117 of the supporting information, which aligns with page 12 of our original financial strategy statements, I noted that the planned expenditure on growth has increased to 299 million, but also the less developer agreement / PPP / IFF funding for growth has actually decreased to 125.3 million when it was 130.7 million. So there's 5.4 million less that we are now anticipating to get through those developer agreements. So whilst our growth has increased, is proposed to increase, our costs for growth are proposing to increase, the income that we get for some of that growth appears to have changed, and I couldn't see anywhere in our agenda to explain that change. I'm just wondering why that's changed and if there are any other changes that we might need to understand, to be aware of, to understand why things have shifted.
I might take that one as well. In the deliberations report to council, we had proposed a change to one of the water programs, bringing expenditure forward from year 7 into year 1 and realigning the timing of that program. That program that the money came out of was a developer agreement funded program because it was right in the later part, and you'll remember earlier this year, council resolved that some of the later growth programs were to be externally funded. So that's where the drop in funding has come from, and the budget has moved into a council-funded debt program for growth.
So when we made that decision to bring that forward, I don't recall that aspect of the change being included in something that we were provided with to consider in making that change. Am I correct, or have I missed something?
You would be correct with that. The information provided was about aligning the budget in line with a quantity survey of how much money we need for that piece of work.
Okay. So the concern that I raised in my questions 12 days ago about the cost to rate of growth has now worsened. Is there any further information that would give us some insight into how much of the cost of growth is now falling with ratepayers as opposed to being paid for by growth?
Through Mr Mayor, I certainly don't have anything to hand on me at the moment, but we could probably try and, when we send the activity statements out, see if we can find a way of actually showing that. But other than the funding impact statements that you have, that's probably the best that we've got at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me, Mr Chair.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Good morning. Thank you very much for providing the modelling for the additional debt repayments for comparing 150 million versus 75 million. Just wanted to know if we have any views from the auditor about making that move, or whether the auditor has an opinion, or have we not run that past them?
Through Mr. Mayor, the auditor will be more concerned with council's ability to meet its strategic financial limits, which the finance strategy outlines. So that's what they'll be, I guess, assessing us against in terms of our debt compliance. What I would say, I guess, is having the additional headroom will give some confidence, given that we've made some assumptions around external funding of certain programs that we are still going through an exercise to ascertain whether we would be fully successful in each and every program that we've earmarked externally funded. So it would give some confidence against financial prudence that we've got some headroom there.
Excellent, thank you. And so just referring to the table that Councillor Naylor was just looking at on page 117 from the financial strategy, that includes that less debt repayment funded through rates, and it puts our total debt at 546 million. So if we were to reduce that amount of additional debt repayments, that would change that figure, I understand?
Yes, yep. So your debt repayment funded from rates would reduce, but also the amount of your external borrowings would be higher than what's currently shown.
Excellent, thank you. And just one question as well at 7.6 about pausing the current consent work for nature calls. And I know we're rushing to a deadline to have our Section 92 questions answered. Does that effectively mean that we'll submit the answers and then they won't assess those answers?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So what we're assuming that we all agree with this today, our plan would be that we would submit the questions, and then at that point we would go down with Horizons and talk to them about, so what do we do now? In relation to that, we'll sort of notify them of the pause. I guess there's a couple of options, and one is that we, parallel with doing the other work, that we still progress some work around those questions. They'll have more, I'm sure they'll have sort of follow-up questions and clarifications. The issue would be, of course, we'll incur cost with sort of progressing those. So I think we'll work that out with them at the time.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple questions for me. I'd like to understand how in the LTP we're communicating that we're in a 3-year transition to a 50-50 rating system.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There are a few places where we would typically make mention. So the rating information note in the supporting documentation would outline council's transition over the 3 years to a 50-50 rating system. The financial strategy would give rise to the fact that we're going through a rating system change and what that's going to be. Plus, I guess as well, out in the community and reported on already around council's decisions that they've made in relation to the rating system today.
Thank you. So on the first part of that, has that already been drafted into the impact statement, etc., or is that yet to come?
If I recall, going through the supporting documentation, if I recall, there were a couple of notes around the rating impact statements that were still being drafted, and the reason for that is it's quite a complicated series of changes to actually get the exact splits of the targeted versus general rate right, and so that's still in publishing, but it's that's where that will show.
Thank you. So by end of June or 26th June, when we finally meet, we'd expect to see a clear articulation.
Yes. Yep.
Great. Thank you. Wanted to understand around some of the off-balance sheet planning, I suppose, and how ready we are to actually move in that direction. I see some of the growth-related off-balance sheet debt is intended to be raised in year one, and just wanted to understand how ready we are to press go on 1 July.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair. So certainly with things that are through the we're perhaps going to look at the IFF. That will take some time. That's not a quick application process. We are having discussions with Crown Infrastructure Partners who administer that scheme. They're coming to see us shortly, actually, to sort of work out exactly how we will end up going through this process. Admittedly, a big interest of theirs as well as around nature calls and ensuring that we're all clear around that. There are some other options we have in the more immediate space around growth, where perhaps we can also explore developer agreements and that sort of thing. So it's not just limited to an IFF application for growth funding. There are some other external funding mechanisms that we're exploring at the same time.
And if during the course of the LTP any of these off-balance sheet instruments fall over, what actually happens?
We'll have to come back to you, Councillor, and outline funding assumptions that turn out to not being workable, and then Council will need to make a decision around what it prioritises, whether it accepts to then fund that through additional debt or to reprioritise its existing program to accommodate such things that couldn't be accommodated in an external manner, but that would definitely come to you for your consideration.
Thank you. Just turning to the covering report, table 3 on page 52. I'd be interested to understand why the non-rates revenue makes a substantially lower contribution in years 2 and 3 compared to year 1.
Through Mr. Mayor, that's probably more referring to things like the fees and charges and that sort of thing. So in years 2 and 3, typically they are inflation adjusted. You'll revisit the actual fees and charges each year with more up-to-date and reflective information of those particular cost of services, remembering that they're only a small portion of Council's overall services. So fees and charges only fund a small pool of the services.
Thanks for that. And finally, just to the recommendations on the screen, 2A, which refers to a pause. Is there any update around what we would expect the duration of that pause to be if things go kind of in a middling way?
Through you, Chair, I think probably nothing more to add for the discussion that we had last week. So it'll be some months,
but not some years.
Look, at one end of the spectrum, it could be more than a year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Well, thanks, Mr. Smith. Thanks, team. So on the May 29th meeting, when we voted for $400 million for the nature calls, was there more than one BPO available to us at $400 million, or is it only going into the river?
Mike, have you got that table? Just double check. I think it was option 1 was the one that was under that amount. Have you got the table? No.
Mike Monaghan, Group Manager for Three Waters, through the Chair. So there was more than one option that came in at under that 400 million, but one of them wasn't considered as the BPO. It was thought that it wouldn't be consentable due to the lower level of treatment at the treatment plants it would receive.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Sorry, just another question. And so, but by adding another $80 million, which was the Mayor's recommendation on the day, would that give us access to purchasing the land for the Nature Calls program? I mean, what does the $80 million allow us to do?
If you took the 480 plus inflation, so in 2024 dollars, that works out to be roughly $550 million. So that certainly gives us a much broader range of options to look at, including land-based options, I believe.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got some questions still around the rescinding of the nature call, so wanting to understand. Can I understand when it was mentioned that the need to have this item rescinded was notified? Can I understand how that was and when that was? Because there's some queries that it was given, but I just want to understand, confirm how that was given. Was it verbal? Was it written? Was it emailed? Because I haven't got a copy of the email. How was the notification given? And was it? Could I read to I would have thought it had public interest. 80 million having public interest, and when was it notified to the public?
Through the chair, our Democracy and Governance Manager, Hannah, has, I think, provided the information previously when she responded to the questions earlier on. It's because of the fact that we're in an extraordinary meeting in terms of notification and provisions of notifications as well, but I do recall providing advice verbally to elected members around it at the last week. So we're satisfied and comfortable that notification about the rescinding of the decision that you made on the 29th of May is appropriate. Otherwise, if I didn't think that we were within our standing orders or appropriate delegations to do so, the resolution wouldn't have appeared on the paper.
Okay, so I can recall, just to clarify, I can recall that being advised at council only after the meeting, and I'm not sure if all members were in attendance to hear that update. If those that weren't in attendance, were they also shared that information?
Part 2, I believe, as well, Councillor.
Okay, just in also with the timing, so that meeting that we're rescinding the resolution was on the 29th of May, which is 8 working days ago. How was it that we get 3 hours from Friday afternoon with the papers, 3 working hours, to get it for 9 o'clock Monday morning?
Through the chair, I don't have any other response to provide you, Councillor, other than the information that we've already provided.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just a separate question. In the definitions of notification, notification's not mentioned just in the definitions of standing orders, but it does have publicly notified, and I would have thought that rescinding a decision that included an $80 million sum would have had public interest, and the public notification outlines that members of the public by notice contained in some newspaper circulated to the district. So with the interest in this from our community and the sum of total, is it not worthy of consideration of the wider public being notified?
Through the Chair, advice that I've just received is that the extraordinary meeting is publicly notified. The rescinding only needs to be notified to the members.
Okay. And are we're confident that this process would stand up in the office of the Ombudsman if there was any challenge to this interpretation?
Officer's advice is yes, because we're still to have another meeting on the 29th of June around the process, around the final decision.
Okay.
So this is just part of the drafting council, which
Okay,
we all know that.
Okay, thank you. Just moving back through to the officer's response to the mayor's query earlier on around the consent, that we need this to get through consent, and I've just made a couple of notes. The response was, yeah, I think that's right, and then went on to say, no, you're dead right. And to think and to be dead right, can I understand which one of those two? Is it needed to progress or to achieve a consent, this resolution, or is it dead right that we do need it?
Sorry, just to clarify, so what you're asking me is the change to the amount is needed?
Yes, so the mayor queried it. He said, we need this to achieve a consent, but in your response you said, yeah, I think so, and then you went on to say, no, you're dead right. And so, so I'm wanting to know, are you absolutely dead right, we need this money, or do you think that it's required?
So I think what we were talking about at the time was the fact that we needed to have consentable options as well, so that it's one thing looking at options, but we want to go through a process and make sure that they're consentable. Recognising at the moment that it's a bit of a moving feast, but as of today, and I suppose when I said yes, dead right, I was referring to the fact that yes, we would want to have consentable options. So as Mr. Monaghan discussed before, there are some options on the list that today would not be consentable. So our view is that, as per the discussion in the paper, is that it is, we would like the clarity around being able to make sure that we're not restricted to go and have a look at all the options and bring back and say these are the ones that we believe are consentable and, you know, optimal for you to have a look at, and they're within your budget. So yes.
Okay.
Does that explain?
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chamber, gentlemen, good morning. When this council received the ridiculously long extra list of questions from the Regional Council, do you have any idea what sort of money that's cost this council and the citizens?
You mean specifically from Horizons, the cost from Horizons?
Yes.
I would need to check exactly what the cost of that is. I guess information provided in the last couple of weeks give you a view about how much we've spent specifically. So of course that relates to some ranging from technical advice that we've received, the preparation of the answers, but I think there's also some cost from Horizon that we need to reimburse them, Mike. Is that right? I think it's, yeah. So it's a whole range. So it's within that whole lot. I could probably go and find out exactly what the cost from Horizons would be. It would be no different than when a developer applies to us for a resource consent to say build a building. We charge that developer some costs, to reimburse some of their time. So there is a user pay component in it. It's no different than what we're doing with Horizon.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a couple of other questions that I forgot to ask. The first one is on page 56 of our papers in clause 7.3 and relates to the Nature Calls decision. The end of that clause, it talks about our second resolution that council revisits the BPO shortlisted options and considers new or alternative options. Now, I'm just wondering if we're considering new or alternative options, why the assumption's being made that 400 would only be providing us the option to potentially look at one option. Have assumptions been made about what new or alternative options may look like or cost?
Through you, Chair, we haven't made a lot of assumptions, to be fair. I suppose when we're talking about one option, then we're saying of the options that are, to be specific, of the options that are on there today. There are other options that we will look at. I suppose, as I've said before, what I want to make sure that we're coming out of this meeting is that we have the ability to go away and consider all options, ones that we may know about, ones that we don't know about, whether there's some new technology, whether there's just some modifications to existing options that might make them more acceptable that we didn't know at the time. So we're sort of trying to make sure that there's nothing left.
Okay, thank you. So if, in terms of your comments that it's a moving feast, that, and what you've just said about there being, it's unknown and there's new technology, what difference does it make whether it's 400 or 480 in terms of officers going and exploring those other options?
As we go and explore options, so I think the number is a signal of the council's level of comfort about what that cost might be. Our feeling was when we looked at it, if it's 400 million excluding inflation, then that sends a signal that there's very small range of options down that end. Now, obviously, we'd love to find a really great option that everyone's happy with that costs us a very little amount of money, but I think we're going to take that cost indicator as one of the things we'll look at in terms of trying to work out what might be on the table and what may not be on the table.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So if council doesn't rescind this decision and the previous resolution stands, does that limit? I mean, obviously, then that would be indicating council's level of comfort around the overall price envelope. Is there anything to say that officers couldn't come back to council in the future when they're more well informed about what those options look like, and then we've got a more well informed position to determine whether our community can afford more than 400 or not?
Through you, Chair. So my intent would be that we go away and look at everything, and we'll bring back a range of options, and there may well be some that we look into, and I guess it's sort of how much work do you do on them really. So if they're above the sort of the number that you indicate comfort with, we probably there wouldn't be a lot of we'd just do enough to sort of understand them. The ones that we think are in the sweet spot are probably the ones that we would do more work on. But yeah, definitely what we'll need to do is to come and bring you everything, full disclosure, obviously. Yeah. I mean, one of the risks that we still have is that we go and we find that the absolute cheapest number that we have in it still at a number that we are very uncomfortable with. So we'll just have to see what we find.
Okay, thank you. And going back to page 117 of the supporting information where those financials are outlined, the line that is the special purpose vehicle funding nature calls, in the first 3 years that used to add up to 17 million, now it only adds up to 6.3 million. So there's quite a significant change in how much we're investing in that in the next 3 years. Does that redistribution of that cost, does that give enough funding in the early years for officers to do the work to be exploring those new or alternative options? So there's zero in year 1, 3.1 in year 2 and 3.2 in year 3. It used to be a lot more than that for over those first 3 years.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the main thing that's occurring through there is reflecting the decision to lower the total cost of nature calls. So that's occurred and that's been apportioned. In year 1 in particular, given that we haven't actually put in a application to the IFF yet, we're not going to have the funding in year 1 for the IFF. So that's going to be loan funded until the application goes in. So we had to account for the interest, and I think that was roughly around 3 million.
Okay, thank you. And just final question is on page 115 of our supporting information, and it's at the top of the page. It says, it's talking about the special purpose vehicle and what that will cost. It still says this is likely to be at least 1,000 per property over 30 years. And so I'm just wondering if we've changed the overall envelope to 400 million, why it would still cost $1,000 per property? Would that not be, I was expecting that might drop to 600 or 700.
Through Mr. Mayor, that I'll have to check with the team, but perhaps that's just a number that we need to update still. If you've lowered the budget, then you would expect that the amount per property would also reduce.
And do we have an estimate of what that looks like at this point, and whether it would still kick in at year 5?
Ultimately, Councillor, at the moment we haven't changed the timing of the program, so at this point in time, anyway, the timing hasn't changed. That we would be able to estimate at this point is probably an apportionment change based on the reduction in the actual budget. But of course, that's just to remind you that is still quite very high level estimates, and it will be quite dependent upon what the actual borrowing rate that CIP would be able to obtain for us. That's detail that the application process would iron out for us. So it's an indication at the moment as opposed to a definite figure.
Yeah, thank you. And the work that officers did in smoothing the rates over the 10 years was consideration of that additional levy kicking in at around year 5 considered in terms of that work, or was that seen as separate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what the team has done in trying to, I guess, give effect to how to put in the debt repayment program, I think it kicks in from years 4 to 10, has been to try and not have big peaks and troughs throughout those years. So it hasn't factored in at this point the specific timing of when that levy might kick in. That's not been factored at this point in time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you. Mine's nothing to do with the BPO. It's just following on from Councillor Barrett to do with the change to the rating system. Those properties in terms of residential business that are impacted more fully, like in terms of 20 or 30 or 40% that are impacted, would you communicate with them more directly, or would you just leave it to the rating invoice that goes out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we probably haven't actually really sat down to work through that at the moment. We've just literally spent the time in giving effect to the recommendations. What I would say though is, particularly for year 1 next year, the impact on those who are who are at the I guess more extreme end under a hybrid option of 30% won't be as impacted in year 1 because it's more 16% on the capital value in year 1. So I guess the result for year 1 is lower than what our preferred option as a council was, but it will be higher by the time we get to year 3. So we may wish to reach out to those at the very highest end, but certainly for year one, the impact is not going to be as dramatic as it was.
So the answer is yes, you will communicate?
Yeah, we'll come up with a way in which we can reach out.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Oh, thanks again, Mr. Mayor. Just coming back in, guys. Can I just get some commentary, please, around our iwi partners and their thinking in terms of do we need to be steered or consider what their thinking is as well in terms of discharging into the river versus across land?
Through you, Chair. Absolutely, is the short answer, and we've already started having some conversations internally about trying to work through the process of what we do over the next few months, and certainly working very closely with all of our partners and key stakeholders around this is going to be critical.
Thanks, Chris. And so to pick up on the Mayor's comments, because he's obviously been talking to all the iwi partners down the line in Foxton and Shannon, that sort of stuff. So to help us as a council understand the impact of those relationships and the requirements that they are seeking in terms of our Nature Calls program, it kind of becomes bigger than just a number without understanding what it is that they are seeking out of our solution for our wastewater treatment.
Yeah, I think that's right. Obviously, what's got us to the table today is the realisation that the cost expectations around this were misaligned with what we thought. So obviously they've got to come back in a lot more strongly. So we need to understand those costs a lot better. However, I think it's important that we don't lose all of the other considerations that we went through, at the time to come up with the BPO, and we bring people with us through that process. Sure. So, look, and I would have thought that a lot of our partners would be equally concerned about the cost elements and would recognise the fact that we need to address those, but we just can't lose, throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here.
Through Chair, just add to that as well, is just keeping in mind, councillors, you haven't made that decision yet. So that'll come back. That's the reason for bringing options back for consideration. So, yeah, just don't want it going out there that decision has been made. Thank you.
So, sorry, and just to follow, I guess what I was referring to is as we're going through examining options and what have you, I think using, working with those partners. So, we could, if we put our heads together, we might find some modifications to existing options that could take significant cost out, but still deal with, say, cost issues, for instance.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question again around the notification. Because it was referenced back that it was verbally notified of the need of, that this was coming forward to rescind the recommendation. At the Part 2 meeting on Wednesday, 5th of June, and yet looking at the minutes, Councillor Meehan and Councillor Naylor were not in attendance. For fairness, were there any follow-up with those two members of the need for the rescinding coming forward?
Through the Chair, my answer to that is no. I'm not aware that I sent anything else out further beyond that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Well, thank you, councillors, and thank you to the officers. That's the long list of questions to you done. Thank you. Seems to be the gift that keeps on giving this this project, this LTP. Okay, so look, councillors, we have a number of recommendations there. We also have some extras from some members. So what we're going to do, just out of transparency, we'll look at 1 and 2, and then we'll come back to Councillor Barrett's, one of his extra motions around nature calls. We'll then go to Councillor Naylor around debt repayment. We'll come back to the catch-all, and then we'll go back to you, Councillor, around the rating review check, which will see us out to the end there.
We separate one A and B.
Yep, sure. Okay. All right. So, councillors, we have their recommendations that that Council A rescind the LTP nature clause 95.11-24, Resolution 1 from Council's May 2024 meeting, and B, replace it with the nature clause budget should be no more than 480 million excluding inflation across the 24-34 long-term plan. I'm happy to move that, and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And look, councillors, I think everybody here is unhappy with the numbers. I don't think there's any debate on that at all. I suppose having been somebody that has sat at the table and of the Nature Calls steering group, along with Councillor Barrett and a couple of other former councillors, leading 50-odd meetings with basically Councillor Barrett and myself most of the time fronting them, we've probably seen the feeling of the wider community, a number of different groups, interest groups, and of course stakeholders, partners that are really keen to see this project. But I do really understand that the numbers are not helpful, and I don't like them and I don't agree with them as well. But it comes down to a process now of how do we progress this in a, I suppose, measured, a professional and a legal way as well. Otherwise, we basically throw away the majority of 4 to 5 years of work, as well as possibly destroying some relationships along the way. So a couple of things. I put up number, or B, but a amendment came across that. I would have thought that with the science around the numbers on B, being 480 million excluding inflation, would have had some understanding around the table. Those that were there, and I appreciate that one or two of you were never happy with the numbers from day one, and that's fine. You're perfectly entitled to your opinion. But there's somebody that sat through everything, and some of you didn't show any interest until right till the end. I do find it a little bit of a waste of my time if this doesn't go anywhere, and certainly a waste of Councillor Barrett's time as well. I want to challenge the methodology as well. I want to check whether it can be staged, against our population growth and our trade waste loads, etc. I want to check whether we've got new technology and possible other discharge options. B gives us that opportunity. This doesn't. If we don't do this, it certainly doesn't bring our partners with us. I almost would categorically say that. But also, it doesn't bring all the previous significant BPO work that was done. And I understand some of you don't like some of the MCA part of it, but it is what it was. And 3/4 of the council of the day voted for that. So I think we're just coming back to the numbers which people don't like. So it keeps the consent process alive with some real numbers that are science-based, and they're not just plucked out of thin air. It keeps the integrity of the process as well, because legislatively, can we just pluck a figure out and then go back and say, oh, look, we're going to have a crack at this? I'm not sure if we can. I'm really not sure if we can. So it keeps integrity with our trade waste customers. We haven't spoken about many of them, hardly them at all. We've certainly spoken about iwi. I know what their feelings will be. Also our regional partners and also interest groups, but most of all the public, because we did go through a public process. But again, I get why some of you want to not do this, is because of the numbers. So, but it does signal that we're not comfortable with the numbers, and it gives the officers an opportunity to have a look at bringing that 1,000 per ratepayer significantly down. And some of the questions sort of alluded to that as well, so I'll be interested to see where the officers get to with that. It also keeps other options open and ring-fenced. You know, we haven't spoken about any other partners possibly bringing some funding or other resources, i.e. land, to the table. This option gives us that opportunity. So please, B is the best advice at the moment. It's coming from officers as well, but for somebody that sat inside that tent for the last 4.5 years, I do have a good feel of where we're going with this. I'm not happy with the numbers, and I'm certainly not going to be party to big numbers that were originally put in front of us. But I do think B has some sides, and of course the inflation part. Remember, we're building this over 3 years. It's a bit of a red herring, the inflation. So when we're building the plant over quite a short period, you'd have to question that. But anyway, I think it does give us the best advice to move forward, and I would seek your support on it, please. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was looking for some new arguments, but some of those were repeated from the meeting of the 29th. When we're reconsidering decisions, I'd like to have new information and actually some things that that we need to consider further. But actually, I don't know if we've even met that threshold, to be honest. The first points I want to talk around is around the process, not the amount. The process here is around the notification of this. When it was verbally notified the need to rescind this, 2 members weren't there and haven't had the update that this was coming, and I don't think that's fair. At least 2 working days notification from a meeting on the 29th of May, which is 8 working days ago, and we get 3 working hours notification of an $80 million decision, which would be right up there as far as the significant decisions the city has to make. That doesn't meet, in my view, a reasonable threshold. I understand and appreciate there's wide community interest in this issue, and the public notification is that it's on our website. But in the definition of standing orders means notified to members of the public, notified contained in some newspaper circulation in the district, which I'd love to have the clipping of the council, and the council's website and social media platforms. It's not a very high threshold, but I'm wondering if we're meeting that. And I'm not so sure this would fly in a review at the Office of the Ombudsman, to be honest. Around good decision making and being informed and new information and the rationale for the urgency. You know, and then let's go to the amount. $80 million. It's not nothing, it's something. And we actually did review, the 400 was an amendment to a motion that was put to that council meeting on the 29th. It wasn't like the 480 was not considered. It was amended. The interpretation around that is also a less comfort that stands to be a new recommendation. And for those issues around process, I'm not going to vote for this. It doesn't meet my threshold of good process, sorry. And then on the arguments for it, I feel like our community should be aware of this decision making. I would have thought that if they were aware, we would have had half a gallery like we would have, during the long-term plan. This is the issue that will create the $1,000 per year funded off the books per ratepayer for the next 30 years. That's the decision we're making here. I think they would want to know about it. Yep, so that's it. There's no new arguments. Sure, we've got partners along the way. We've got a community of residents, ratepayers that we also represent here. The figures, you know, the other option report that was in the 2021 paper of options had an option that we could do a dual discharge system for around 420. How come that's not mentioned here today? It's only mentioned around the best option, which had the highest level of discharge. It was the gold-plated version, and I'm not comfortable with the 480, but I'm less comfortable around the process to get to this decision today. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I concur with many of Councillor Dennison's concerns around the process, and I won't repeat those, but do want to focus on some of the other reasons why I will not be supporting rescinding this decision. The officer's comments in 7.3 of our agenda, I think, make some assumptions and are premature, suggesting that a $400 million cap would restrict council to looking at potentially only one option fails to recognise that we have actually asked to consider new and alternative options. That's officers assuming what those new and alternative options look like now before they've even investigated them. So, you know, we've heard from officers today that, you know, this is a moving feast, there's a whole lot of undetermined things. I do not believe we have any new information here today. And this motion actually is $150 million different, including inflation. Has been clarified that would be $550 million. This is not the reset that the majority of councillors asked for on the 29th of May. In fact, we did consider 480 million plus inflation. We considered it very carefully, and some of us weren't comfortable with it, so supported an amendment. That does not mean that it wasn't considered in that meeting. So, in terms of the Mayor's comments about some of us not showing interest until the end, I push back on that. I certainly was one of, amongst others, who were requesting minutes from those meetings because we felt that we wanted to be better informed about that process. Some of us weren't comfortable that all that work was happening with the steering group, and acknowledged that this is the biggest decision for this council and needs to be made at this table. And that is why all information should be provided with enough time for all elected members to consider that information. I mean, this is the biggest piece of work, and I think we did get a very clear message from our community through the submissions that they were not comfortable with the size of the envelope. The officers have clarified that at this point, what we're doing is indicating council's level of support for the size envelope. And from my perspective, I'm much more comfortable with the sized envelope being 400 than it being 550. That is just really tweaking, that's just taking down the contingency and carrying on with the path that we were already on. That is not listening to our community's feedback, who've said we cannot afford nature calls in its current form. I understand this does not make it smooth or straightforward, but we are asking for this to be a $400 million envelope, we're saying we need a reset. We need to look at new and alternative options, not just the ones that have already been put on the table. So I'm very strongly not in support of rescinding that decision.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors. I will be supporting this, which means I'm also going to be changing my mind for supporting the drop to $400 million. And the reason that I'm going to support it today is the unintended consequence that I wasn't aware of, and I'll take responsibility for not doing my homework. The unintended consequence of the $400 million decision that I supported is going to discharge all of our waste straight into the river. 2009 was reported that our Manawatu River was the dirtiest river in the world. And I don't want to be part of that going forward, so I'll be supporting it. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, here we are 5 years into quite a journey, and certainly at a point where we do well need to pause and catch breath and reflect on what is most appropriate in terms of the way forward. So, you know, in fact, I do have some sympathy for the concerns that others have raised around the costs and where those costs have gotten to, and in fact, I share many of those concerns. I think we also need to be mindful of the bigger picture here and where overall this takes us. I'm more than willing to own some of the concern that's developed around this table around the investment needs, more than willing to own some of the needs, some of the concerns that have developed in the wider community around those investment needs as well. And I would say that going with a blunt number in the long-term plan without any context around it in terms of how that would actually play out across the diversity in our community didn't help us at all. And unfortunately now we're kind of in a situation where we're wearing the blowback of a very blunt number going out without that contextual information as it could have if we had done some financial modeling earlier on, which I'll be speaking to soon. Would also accept that, we are in a less than ideal point in terms of process, but unlike Councillor Dennison, I'm very confident that it would stand up to examination, so I'm comfortable to be here to support these resolutions today. I'll just say by way of, context on this, the current River Plus land was selected after an incredible amount of work, and the Mayor alluded to some of that. It's the most comprehensive engagement and consultation exercise this council has ever done with the community that got us there. Significant involvement from Mana Whenua, and it had years of engagement with stakeholders and the regulator. And it landed on a hybrid option, River Plus land. No surprise. I mean, it was also that 20 years ago when this whole thing was done and everyone decided that at that point it was too expensive, unfortunately, because back then it would have been realized for far less than $100 million. So I think one thing we can learn from our continued thinking about this process and deliberations on it is that the longer we wait, the more it will cost, as a councillor's line of questioning discovered again just this morning. So I would caution us about taking approaches that lead to significant delay. And that, to me, is the strongest reason that we need to continue to advance this in a way that keeps that optionality open, that does not significantly break trust with stakeholders, the community, or the regulators, so that we have our best chance of realizing this project this time around. In terms of some new arguments, my main concern is that if we derail after 5 years, at this point in history, we end up with something that ends up getting done to the community rather than with the community. And what I'm referring to then is that a regional entity actually starts to call the shots rather than this council. What I'm referring to is the risk that this turns into a fast-track process and is something that is done to this community by 3 ministers rather than something that we actually continue the journey that we started 5 years ago. This is why I have described it and continue to as playing with fire, and I would indicate in the strongest terms that I would encourage colleagues that voted to pluck 400 million out of the air a few days ago, strongly reconsider and take an approach that actually leads us to a continued continuity of the program of work that has been now years and years in the making. This is still ultimately governed by consentability, and I will say that no amount of posturing about price overcomes that fact. So we need to be very strategic here and continue to work constructively on a way that actually realizes this most strategic of projects for our community, and would urge you to vote in support of the rescinding and in support of 1B to see a number that actually maintains optionality at a critical point in this process. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think in terms of new information, I think the new information here is how pursuing our original decision will lock us into limited options or option, and that wasn't the intent of that decision. I think that's highly relevant. This ties our hands behind our backs and prevents us from fully exploring all of our viable, consentable options. Now, I absolutely trust the officer's advice given that, as the Mayor said, they've been working on this for years now, right on the front lines, really deep in it, and with more technical expertise than any of us as to what the details of those options actually are. So in terms of thinking about scope and having new and alternative options from a reset, what contestable options are we actually envisaging that wouldn't have been considered when we first started the work, that would radically change the situation we're in? I think if there was those options, we'd know about it already. we've been having this conversation for a long time. It's the excluding inflation aspect of this recommendation that I think is very important. It allows us to be responsive to changes that are outside of our control. So these are turbulent times. There are all sorts of things going on that will impact this project that we have no control over, and being able to be responsive to that is extremely important. But also, our community said really clearly through submissions, just get on with it. Look at the cost, but just get it done. And this motion does that, but it does it more realistically than what we've currently got. So we'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm going to be brief because others have already spoken in support of the recommendations before us. 400 million, excluding inflation, was never ever likely to be realistic as an envelope for our long-term plan, bearing in mind that it'll be a number of years before we actually start to spend that money. So 480 million, inflation adjusted, does provide that realistic envelope that we will actually need to look at a number of options to ensure that we get the right outcome. Rescinding and replacing provides a pathway to revisit the BPO in a measured and appropriate way. We have to bear in mind that whatever we do going forward has to be consentable, and furthermore, it must be palatable and also acceptable by those affected by what we do in the future. So for all of those reasons, and the fact that I think Council has to operate in good faith in terms of its partners and stakeholders, I will be supporting both of the matters that are before us. Thank you.
Councillor Happada.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. As the mover of the 400 million, I'll be looking to change my vote and I'll be looking to go for 1A. The reasons why I'm changing my vote is that I'm going to be pragmatic about this. I think that moving forward, we need to get an option that most councillors can agree to. I do push back on the word posturing about a price. It's not posturing about a price. It was listening to our community. So I do push back on that from a councillor. But I do think that we do need to get this over the line so that our officers can get on and get to the work, because that's what this needs to happen, is get the work done and not busy argue in the chamber about what the process is. So I do think that we do need to get on and get it done, and I will support 1A and 1B. The only claw on my side is the inflation, but if we have to stomach the inflation, we have to stomach the inflation, but I do have a problem with the inflation, but I'll stomach it.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have to say I found this one quite difficult, not because I didn't really see a conflict between those two recommendations that we originally moved, and that was not my intention. So for me, the intention of our discussion last week was very much to empower a revisit of options, whilst signalling what I think we all heard clearly from the community, which was a real reluctance around that $1,000 a year number that was being bandied around. And for me, the most important thing out of this whole decision is that we recognise that's where we've got to with our community. Absolutely hear what Councillor Barrett said. I think the work that happened on Nature Calls in that community engagement, I think was award-winning at the time. We win many awards in this council, it's hard to keep track, but I think that one was an award-winning piece of engagement. But that was in 2020, 2021. And my feeling from this LTP particularly is that the work has continued in this building and with our people and with some of us, but we've not continued to take our community on that journey with us. Yeah, for me, that's the learning of this LTP, and that's the biggest thing I want to see reset out of this conversation, is that we pick up that conversation again and we continue to walk forwards with our community and land this in a place where we can all be satisfied that as many of the needs and wants of the process have been met. So for me, this isn't particularly about the number, and I will happily admit that 400 million was entirely plucked out of thin air. I said so at the time because it was never about the number. And so I don't think 480 is a massive problem for me here. Even at 480, that's still $167 million less than what we consulted on. So that's still a significant move in the right direction. For me, what's more important is that we get a look at those options again at this stage and we reset that community conversation to get us all on the same page again, because the world has changed a great deal since the last time we engaged strategically with our community about this. We were not talking cost of living crisis back then. Yeah, that is a significant change that's happened. And we talked about it in the meeting. I think the comment I made at the time was we need to balance the aspirations of our community with what's affordable for our community. And that's a conversation we're not landing at the moment. So in the interests of getting on with it, I will support the rescinding of that 400 million decision and the subsequent decisions that sit behind that. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to support, to actually rise in support of the recommendations before us. Initially, when it came to the council at our meeting on the 28th or 29th of May, I did not support the $400 million cap that was put on it because for a number of reasons, and those reasons were the same reasons that officers actually advised us on this paper, that a $400 million cap would restrict council to looking at potentially only, one option for the wastewater treatment. So those were the reasons as to why I refused to support the 400 million cap initially. And I also thought that ring fencing it to $400 million for the life of the project did not take into consideration inflation, increases in land value in case we were to retain the same option that we currently have, and also interest rates over the life of the project as well. And I just felt like kicking the can down the road will cost us even more in the future. $480 million, I think, allows us, headroom to explore new and alternative options and look at other possibilities. So I think it's a good directive to give officers to go and find out different options and come back to us with financial modelling and costings, and that will give us better better information to make informed decisions going forward around this project. I think my last point, a lot has been said around the, a lot has been said in favour of these recommendations, but I think the last point that I also wanted to make was around the process which Councillor Dennison and Councillor Naylor have identified earlier on. While the process might not have been ideal, and fair comments or questions from the councillors, but I'm confident that based on the officer's advice that we've received today, that it stands any assessment or threshold test that the Office of the Ombudsman might apply to this process, and I'm very confident that it will stand, given that we still have more time to make a decision around this, and we're coming back at the end of the month to make this final decision. So in light of those reasoning or in light of those comments, I'll be supporting this, and I'll encourage everyone else to also support us. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I came into this open to hear what the new arguments might be put forward by councillors, and the only one of any substance that's being put forward is that this might mean there aren't many options that we can do at that level of 400 million, including inflation. The officers have written that. This would potentially leave us with only one option. It would potentially leave us with more than one option. We don't know, because we haven't done that work that councillors requested when we signalled that reset 2 weeks ago. Councillors' officers confirmed in questions from Councillor Naylor that if there were options that came at a cost of more than 400 million, including inflation, they could still bring those to us if that's what came throughout the process. So we are working with exactly the same information that we had 8 working days ago. That's exactly what I said then, is that officers will quite possibly come back to us and quite likely come back to us with options that cost more than 400 million. But the purpose of that decision was that when that came back, there was a check and balance with council that we would then have to approve that additional budget, rather than it being assumed within the budget that already exists. So no councillor sitting here under the illusion that 400 million would necessarily be the figure written in stone that we ended up spending. But what it meant process-wise is that there was that check back at this council table and that pressure to look at lower costs. And so in light of that, I don't think we are dealing with any alternative information to what we had, certainly to the information I understood from 8 days ago, that this would potentially limit our options. Absolutely. The less money you have, the less options you're going to have. That's reasonably implicit. So in that, I would encourage councillors who did support this 8 days ago that although the paper says this might lock us into one option, answers from officers have told us very clearly that that is not the case, that they will bring other options back to us. So I would really hope that councillors could still support the decision that we made 8 days ago based on the response to questions that we've had from our team. This came to us at 4 p.m. on a Friday. I don't know how one working hour could possibly be in line with our standing orders, but anyway, I've taken the advice from the team. I'm not going to make aspersions about the Ombudsman, but I just, in terms of good process, I don't think this is one. In terms of consentability, I'm going to say something quite outrageous here. It doesn't matter what's consentable if we can't afford to build it. There is no point standing here in a year's time with our consent in hand saying, good work team, we've got the consent. There's only one issue, that we can't actually build the thing. So it matters what price we put on it. It actually does. It really matters what price we put on it. So in terms of affordability from our community, 647 million, on the figures, if I was going to waste everyone's time, I'd move an amendment that it was 550 including inflation, so we're actually dealing with level figures here, because we're talking about 400 including, 480 excluding, 647 including, so there's a makes it very difficult to have this conversation. So to be very clear, the reduction is $97 million from 647 to 550, that's what we're talking about. But where's I going with that? So $1,000 at 647 of a levy to our community per year at 550 would be $850. So that's a $150 change in terms of what we're talking about, appreciating that those are high-level figures. So I don't think that is enough of a change to respond to our community and the feedback that we receive through this process. I don't think that is enough to say, oh, we've done something, we've made it more affordable for our community. Well, actually, I don't think we're going to be able to build a plant at a cost of $550 million. I would be very surprised if the IFF comes back and says that's affordable. I'd be very surprised if that's something that council is actually able to do. So I think that we actually do a disservice to our community by charging on with a process where we know quite possibly full well that we can't afford to build it at the end, spending goodness knows how much money getting to that point. So I realise it's tough, but I would rather be honest with our officers and with our team and say, actually, certainly for me, I don't have an appetite for 550. And so when we get to that point, I don't believe I'll support it. Of course, seeing what the arguments are at the time. If your feeling is that you don't think 550 is affordable, then there's no point in us charging ahead with this now. All that does, as Councillor Naylor said, by being realistic, what councillors are actually meaning is just do what we were going to do anyway with a lower contingency. So I don't think we should just do what we were going to do anyway. I think we really need to seriously go back to the drawing board on this. And I appreciate that that is frustrating. I appreciate that it's a giant waste of all of our times. And I appreciate that it's a terrible position to be in. This is a terrible position. But I'm not going to support rescinding the decision we made 8 days ago, because I think the information is exactly the same as it was, that yes, this might limit our options, but it might not. Officers will come back to us with choices. And so councillors, I'd really encourage you, please, if you did support that decision in the first place, hold the line. This was the right decision. This does still give us options in the future, and our community will thank us for it, because nobody will thank us for having a consent to build something that we can't afford.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm confused. Wonder if I could ask a quick question of officers, please?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, sir. Councillor Dennison quite rightly brought up the extraordinary meetings and point 3.13.6, sorry, 3.13.5, it talks about publishing in newspapers. It's my understanding this council no longer uses this standard for publishing. Is that correct?
No, that is incorrect.
That's incorrect?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, tēnā koutou e hoa mā. Well, I don't think there's a council in the country that can afford anything that we're required to do. And Yet we do. We do have to do it. I'm grateful that the officers brought this back to us. I know, like Councillor Zabellin, they have experience and expertise, and they've been looking at this day in, day out for the last 5 years. Councillors have too. Councillors who are here and councillors who aren't here. I also know that there's not one person around the table who wants the rates to go up more than what they need to. But we are required to go through a process as identified by central government, and we're trying to move through that process. I do think that we do need to have a realistic envelope, and it's probably better to signal this is actually likely to cost this much more than be conservative. We could have said, look, it'll be 200 million, and yet that wouldn't be realistic either. There are many unknowns in this, and I do understand where everyone around the table were coming from, and it's not palatable. This entire kaupapa is not palatable. However, I do think we need to be open and looking at those options. I don't want to be restricted to make a decision, but we need to be open to the financial perspectives, partnership perspectives, and the common good for the community and the taiao, the environment. As stated, it helps us move forward, and we will know more as we move through this and in time. So I will be supporting this, and the arguments that Councillor Barrett, Councillor Zabellin and Councillor Hancock had raised were ones that were very much in my kaupapa. Kia ora.
Thanks, councillors. Look, just as a quick right of reply, recommendation 1B, we have brought back new information, and I just want to say to Councillor Wood, you know, some of your colleagues have said that they did not know what they were voting for. So, and officers have indicated that there is only one likely option if we go down a very narrow path. We're all assuming that we're going to aim at 480 as a target. I'm not. I'm certainly not going to. So probably the only part I agree with you, Councillor Wood, is I won't be sitting here, if I'm lucky enough to sit here, and sign off on 550. That's not what I want to do at all. What I want to do is respect the process, respect RMA legislation. You're flying in the face of all of that at the moment if you bail out on this. So if it respects everything that we've gone through, but it also gives officers opportunity to, you know, and if we go through to 2 in a moment or later on after a well-needed cup of tea, that we take stock of what we're doing, we look at what our partners, because there's partners in this now, and nobody's spoken about that. What do the partners bring to the table? We've got trade-waste partners, we've got iwi partners, we've possibly got a wider government partner or regional partner. So, I mean, I think there's a little bit of lack of understanding of what's gone on in the past, and I admit that the decisions need to be made in this chamber. But when I presented to the Foxton community, there was only Councillor Barrett and a couple of other councillors behind me, and they did not like what we were saying. So I say that we've all got to front this together, not choose when we come into processes. So please, councillors, I really do want you to, this still keeps all the options open. I'm with you on the costs. It does give out, and look, the community have spoken about not being affordable, but they've also said to us, please get on with things. Get on with things. So we've got to keep the process going in that sense. We also need to bring our stakeholders with us. We also need to check the methodology, challenge the costs, challenge the staging. The officers will know where I'm going with this, and really interrogate some of those numbers, because some of them are quite big contingencies. So that is where I want to drill down. This still gives us that opportunity. It's not a target, councillors, so if you think we're signing off on 480 million, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get us into a space where we can keep the process going. If we go to 400, we stop, we rip up $5 million worth of work, we start again, we destroy relationships, and I don't think that's what you all want to do. So please, if you can vote for B, it keeps us moving, but with some clear signals around costs. So we will vote, please. Oh, you wanted to separate it, councillor?
Yeah, we're just doing one.
Okay, we're just going to do 1A first, please.
A and B together.
Oh, okay, we're doing 1A and B, sorry. It's a long day already. 1A and B, please. And that has passed 10 votes for. into, which is around to work with Horizons Regional Council, in two parts. This A, to pause the current consent application under the Resource Management Act 1991, and B, rephrase the timing of the Nature Calls program to allow for a review of the best practical option. I'm happy to move this, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I think, councillors, this goes with our comments that we've just been through previously, and allows, well, it gives good, I suppose, timing and process to the Regional Council and understanding where we're at, but also gives some time to just review, as Councillor Bowen said in her commentary, around how things have moved and around the BPO process and options out of that. So I hope you'll support this, because it does make sense and it does fit with what we've just voted on. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following your comment, I had a question, if possible, just about if we're reviewing the BPO, what community consultation will be required in that space?
I'm unsure, but I think that would probably come back to us in some sort of report from officers. Am I correct in that space? Yeah, good. Okay, there being no further comments, we will vote, please. Has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Okay, move through to move through to 2C, and this is an extra recommendation from Councillor Barrett. Chief Executive report on prospective Nature Calls funding and financing options, including analysis of their potential costs at a householder level. So, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, hopefully a reasonably non-contentious approach to how we navigate from here, and possibly could be seen as implicit in 2B, but I think it is worth making it explicit. I think we were in the unfortunate position through the long-term plan of going out with quite a blunt figure that didn't really do us any favors. It sowed concern in the community by not understanding the context and the range of ways in which that could be approached, and even listening to some of the commentary earlier this morning, it continues to show that. And I think we need a consideration that talks about what does funding and finance look like with and without, what does funding and finance look like with and without regional partners, what does it look like with and without private capital, what does it look like with and without government investment, what does it look like when it's apportioned on a property basis or property value basis, what does it look like if it's apportioned on a use basis. There are some basics that we could actually paint a reasonable picture for ourselves and for the wider community to understand the nuance around that figure, whether it's 1,000, 850, or any other number. So I would see this as being concurrent with 2B in terms of getting that information back. And I think it's simply the basics of what we need to be able to bring forward to the community. If I had my time again, we would have done this 12 months ago and possibly would have prevented ourselves some of the pain that we've inflicted on ourselves. But where we are now, so we will move forward with this, and I'd ask for your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I agree. In hindsight, this probably should have come forward a little bit sooner, but I will support you. I think it's a good opportunity to have a decent analysis at a household level, what that might look like, including possible other external funding as well. All right, there being no other comments, you don't need to write a reply. We will vote, please. Passed, 15 votes for and none against. Okay, we now have 3A, and this is from Councillor Naylor, that Council agree to an additional debt repayment totalling 75 million as outlined in Table 5 instead of 150 million. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Colleagues, this is something I think is worth us considering at this point. In listening to our community's feedback, I think there was two really big messages. One is spend less and have reduced the debt, and the other is give us some rates relief. I think through the recommendations that were passed a couple of weeks back, we have made a small impact on the debt levels. Unfortunately, the information in front of us in our papers doesn't show over the 10 years much in the way of rates relief. Our option to, the original suggestion worth of additional payments was really to keep us under that 250% limit. We're now well below that with either option, which is outlined on page 54 if you want to see both those options. And considering whether to pursue this today, I am aware that, of course, this can be revisited again in 3 years' time when we do our next LTP. But this does indicate an intent, and my reason for pursuing this is that I'm concerned that we are not including the cost of nature calls in our consideration of smoothing the impact to our community. So we're looking at rates increase across the 10 years as a completely separate thing, and then we're looking at the 1,000 or 800 or 900 or whatever it ends up being in terms of hitting that at the moment at around year 5. We're looking at that as a separate thing, and they actually, in terms of the impact on ratepayers, they both have a really significant impact on ratepayers. So as you can see in years 5, under what is proposed with the $150 million repayments, we've got a 6.6% increase in year 5, 6.6 in year 6, 7.1 in year 7. For those middle years, if we repay 75 instead, that drops to 5.5, 5.7 and 5.4, which, in considering people will have an additional levy to pay, is still quite high. So that's my rationale for perhaps testing the waters as to whether this is something that would be appropriate given that additional nature calls cost in the middle years.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to speak to the irony of me seconding this as a councillor who's been quite strong in favour of additional debt repayment over the course of our long-term plan. I distinctly remember, I think I was sitting in this seat at a workshop when I was only been on council for about 6 months, saying, as we go through the long-term plan, is there any chance we'd be able to include additional debt repayment to get our debt-to-revenue ratios down? I remember being scoffed at by councillors. I remember councillors saying, William, you don't understand the principle that we repay debt over a 30-year period and we cover the cost of assets by not just those who live here today, but over a longer period of time so that it's spread over all the ratepayers that enjoy it. And I remember it being effectively shaken off as a silly suggestion that we should repay any additional debt over our long-term plan. And that stuck with me because I found that really hard at that point as something that I believe so strongly in. And so I want to be clear today in supporting this. I am supporting $75 million of additional debt repayment through our long-term plan, and I believe it is crucial that we do that. But why am I supporting a lower amount? For a few reasons. Firstly, I said in this chamber that debt was what was driving the increase in rates over the course of our long-term plan. And I appreciated that perhaps in the past that had not been the case. The reason that may not have been the case is because we didn't have this additional debt repayment figure budgeted into it. And so one of the key advantages that we achieved over the last 3 days of LTP deliberations is we reduced our capital spend by $139 million. That means that our debt-to-revenue ratios go down considerably, and that gives us the headroom that we don't need to go as hard and as fast on additional debt repayment. What does that mean in practical terms? And I'll take a moment to talk about this now. Table 4 on page 54, I really can't believe it. So we reduced our capital spend, we reduced our operational spend. Table 4 proposes a 108% increase in rates over the 10 years. We consulted on 103. I've really lost faith in the process, frankly, that councillors can reduce spending and reduce our capital program and rates go up. That is nonsensical. And there was no good answer really, as to why that was the case, other than, oh, well, perhaps there's been some inflation because we've pushed things out to the later years. But if that was the case, and then we were having to pay more interest, well, then our debt-to-revenue ratio would have been higher. So that's not what's happening. I don't know what is, and I can't understand how that's even possible. So under this $150 million debt repayment, we would increase rates by 108% over the 10 years. Under Table 5, and under this amendment, we would increase rates by 90.1%. What's the difference in terms of headroom? Because I appreciate as council we need to leave ourselves and leave future councils with headroom. Under the 150%, at its lowest, our headroom will be 50.5 billion. Under the proposal of Councillor Naylor I have here, lowest it would be was 43 million. So for the sake of $8 million of headroom, I would rather we saved 18.7% in the rate increase over the 10 years. So that's what we're dealing with here. If almost 20% to save $8 million of headroom at its lowest, that's something I'm willing to stomach. I want to be really clear. I am in full support of additional debt repayment. And frankly, if the costs in this plan weren't as high as they are, I would be in full support of 150 million. But the key driver for me in accepting 150 million, and I know that might have been the case for some other councils may have had different drivers, was that we needed to keep within that 250% limit. We have done a good job of reducing our capital spend, meaning that under either of these options, we get nowhere near what we were proposing. We were proposing to be at 247% of that limit and staying around there for a few years. Under either of these options, our debt to revenue ratio peaks nowhere near that high. So I'm trying to put out a reasoned argument here that councillors, one of the great advantages of what we did is that we don't have to go as hard and fast on debt repayment. I don't do it with any pleasure because I do support additional debt repayment, but I think we have to be balanced here. And for the sake of 20% on the rates, for an extra 8 million of headroom, I just don't believe it is worth it and worth the cost to our community. So I hope you'll support this as a reasonable middle ground.
Sorry, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to support this. Just two arguments I just want to come against. One is that the reason we included 150 was only to keep under the headroom. I don't think that was the only compelling argument to have 150 million debt repayment, and I think it's consistent whether we have a need around that headroom or not. This is around the provision of future generations, and to say just $8 million difference is not just 8 million. You make 8 million sound like it's just 10 or 20 bucks. 8 million is a significant sum of money, and so the value of doing this comes down for not just the next 10 years. It's actually for the generations to come. We should be having this principle in place, and so I'm committed to it. The arguments, in my mind, are short-lived for the benefit, and so I'll be opposing it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
And councillors, I won't be supporting it. It just, in 30 years of business, this just doesn't make any financial sense at all. I'm sorry, councillors. My grandfather, my father, my bank manager always said the best thing to do is pay down debt. So this is more around keeping rates low in the short term. And I accept there's some merit in that. But at the expense, as Councillor Dennison said, of our kids, possibly even people 10 years older than us. So look, we've got an opportunity, councillors, to change this in 3 years' time if this doesn't look the right thing to do. But we've got to signal to audit, to everybody that we are looking at our debt levels as well. Yes, we've built a lot of things, and as Councillor Wood said, they're paid over, some of them, the bigger items are paid over intergenerational, but not the small items. And they do need to be paid for in a quicker sense. I agree, we have done well, and I look at the first 3 years in reality, because we have real opportunities to change things in a reset in 3 years' time. So, we looked at, over the next 3 years, we've pushed rates down basically 6% to 28.4 over those 3 years. And look, that's the lowest of New Zealand cities. And I accept that it's still hugely challenging for most people. But when you live in Hamilton, Tauranga, Napier, New Plymouth, Nelson, and the double digit, in the high double digits for the next 3 years, Palmerston North is not in too bad a position. In saying that, we still have the Nature Calls project to deal with as well. So I have some sympathy for this, but financially it just does not make any sense at all. So I won't be supporting it. It does lumber future people and future councils actually as well with real headaches. We've got to deal with our own headaches at the moment, and the best way of doing this is paying down some debt and revisiting it in 3 years' time. So ask you to reject this, please. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I'm not going to support the motion that's in front of us. And I don't know which chair I was in every time we had this debate, but it happens every 3 years at LTP. It used to be a persistent refrain from former Deputy Mayor Councillor Jeffreys. He would always put up a debt repayment programme that we would all grudgingly accept. And then at the end of the day, when we looked at the rates rise, we would just take it out again. And that's what we did. We thought about it and we went, oh yes, that's really interesting, but no, thank you. So I was actually quite surprised and pleased that we went out this year with a really substantial debt repayment programme. I think in the past we've teetered around the minuscule 8 million mark to go with it. That should be our debt repayment. This time we went, let's do something big. Let's really try to cut into that debt repayment. I think we all hear that concern from our community about the level of debt that not just our council carries, but the local government carries around the Motu. That's, I think maybe it's not well understood why council is leveraged in that way, the way that we're funded, but the reality is that our community don't really like it. And so for me, keeping with what we've sent to our community about our intention here to pull down debt is as important as the conversation about reducing rates. I don't see that we need to rob from one to pay the other. We've done some good work. People will always say we could have done more, but that's no reason to not do the good work on this side as well.
Councillor Apata.
Just very briefly, I won't support it. I support the 150, so I'll just like to keep it at 150. Thank you.
Councillor Michelard.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, I will be supporting this just for the reasons outlined by fellow colleagues early on about creating some capacity regarding the council's debt headroom going forward. And the key principle that I've also learned is not to bind future councils by supporting this. We're simply binding future councils as well and not giving them enough room to do different things. I mean, should I be given the opportunity to serve again on this table? It's just simply, handcuffing future councils from doing anything significant or not giving them room enough to do anything that's needed or required for future challenges that Palmerston North might be facing in the future. This is simply a matter of robbing Paul to sort of give to Peter or pay Peter and that sort of thing, so to speak. So I will not be supporting this. Good in intention, but I think it's not the right timing. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really appreciate this being put forward and I appreciate the arguments, and I think it's been well worth testing with the room. I did ask some questions about this during questioning, particularly around the auditor and whether or not the auditor had a view as to the extent to which we should be accelerating or having additional payments. And from the answer I got there, the auditor was primarily concerned with maintaining headroom on the basis that we have quite a number of projects that are externally funded or pegged to be externally funded, and if we don't secure that funding, then that headroom would be integral to making sure that those projects could still progress. But I do note that we did pass a catch-all motion which said that if we couldn't, well, that none of these projects would proceed until that funding was secured. So I think that risk is mitigated somewhat, but we did also note that if we couldn't secure funding for these projects, then we might actually just not progress with them at all. So it's not an equivalent risk mitigation, and to my mind, from that perspective. I think I have nature calls in mind as well in considering this, in that there is still a high degree of uncertainty as to how much or what is going to be paid when, or what the impacts of that will be. And I do feel that it is wise to keep a tight rein on the debt, on our total net debt levels, while we can, and just while that's so uncertain. So I do have sympathy with where the mover and seconder are coming from in testing the quantum. I think on balance I am satisfied for it to remain at a proactively large figure that can make a pretty meaningful difference in keeping us below that headroom, noting that it's not only external funding that that headroom would be applicable for, but also emergency management, disaster management, when we know that insurance costs have gone up, crazy amounts. And we've seen the hammering that other councils have taken from that perspective. So I will not be supporting this, but I'm very appreciative for the opportunity to test that quantum here. I think that's very appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Naylor, right reply.
Thank you. Just briefly, a few points I want to pick up on. Firstly, this doesn't bind any future councils to anything. We do all of this again in 3 years' time. Fundamentally, I'm actually, as a principle, in favour of debt reduction and debt repayment as well. But it's at what cost do we impose that on our community? Often I compare what we do here in a smaller scale to what all of us do at home in terms of managing our own home finances. And those of us with a mortgage who own a house, we often, I know there's been plenty of times that I've looked and said, is now a time that we put our mortgage repayments up so that we can pay off our debt quicker. And for our community, that is something that's worthy of us considering. I guess the question I put to you is the cost, in the environment of where people have the cost of living crisis and have appealed to us about how the rates increase is affecting them, is that the time to impose additional debt repayment? I also do recall those debates when Jim Jeffries proposed 8 or 10 million, and I'm a bit gobsmacked really that now we're debating whether it's 75 or whether it's 150 million. Oh, times have changed. So I hear the comments here and acknowledge this probably isn't going to get across the line today, but I thought it was a worthwhile thing for us to consider given the feedback from our community.
Okay, we will vote. And that is 4 votes for and 11 against. Right. We'll now go to number 3. And this is around, when I can get it up. Okay. That council agree the long-term plan and associated strategies and policies is attached for audit and presentation for adoption on the 26th of June 24, subject to changes above and any consequential changes in strategies, policies, significant forecasting assumptions and financial statements. I'm happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Colleagues, we've debated this to length and appreciate the last week's actually 2 weeks ago now, deliberations. It seems like we're in this room more often than not, and I think we've given this a pretty good thing based on submissions we've got and trying to, I suppose, balance expectations from those that want our city to continue in a positive manner, but also bearing in mind the ability to pay in what is a challenging environment, and I hope one that we will soon have some better economic environment that we operate in. So this is really, I'll leave full comments to the meeting of the 26th, but to ask you to support this, please. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to quickly explain why I actually can't support this at this time. 2 weeks ago, I was feeling fairly satisfied that we'd all worked really hard and made some pretty significant adjustments in response to our community's feedback. So in reading the papers over the weekend, I felt incredibly disappointed, to be honest, to see that we haven't actually shifted the dial that much. And in reflecting over the whole process, not just in the last 2 weeks, but the last year and a half, I think there's two main things that I think where I would consider we've had fundamental flaws in our process. The first flaw, I think, was the decision to leave everything in to begin with. Realistically, we have not got enough meeting days to realistically get everything out that we needed to get out to make this plan affordable for our community. We spent 2.5 days 2 weeks ago. We spent quite a few days during the draft process and certainly didn't manage to shift the draft very much at all. We have still got, we're still looking to more than double our debt over the next 7 to 8 years, going up to 546 million. This is at a time where our communities pleaded with us to pull back on our spending. The second flaw, I think, really in this process was a failure for us to really miss taking the opportunity for us to give a really good, taking an opportunity to review our levels of service. This is something that other councils did do in the draft stage. We were able to put some options out to the community to reduce some services. What this plan does is mostly simply add a lot of things over and above, at new levels of service, particularly in the capital space, over and above. While it's less than what we consulted on, I think it's nowhere near what our community was asking us. So I just can't hand on heart say yes to this at this point. In addition to that, in trying to make my own informed analysis of why our overall rates increase over the next 10 years is more now than when we consulted, I really didn't feel that I had adequate information, and in response to questions, the officers will provide that in due course, but I haven't been able to really look at what's driven our operational costs to be more by the 10 years than what they were in our draft. And so without that, I mean, we don't really have the real ability to make changes at this point, I understand, but where we've landed, I simply cannot support.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The point that I wanted to pick up on what Councillor Naylor shared around having everything included from the start, from our considerations, I think is actually a flawed approach right from word go. So I wanted to, I guess, expand on that and kind of emphasise that. I think that was a fundamental flaw. For anything that was considered in the last long-term plan and being considered but not funded should stay in that status and not be included arbitrarily just to kind of be considered to be taken back out again. So, fair point. The other ones, though, I think, why we got through quite a lot of hearings, like great, seeing new faces come and present to their submissions equally in the hearings, and our 2.5 days of deliberations. I just want to celebrate the fact of how that was conducted. I feel like while there are pretty meaty issues and there are lots of concerns around from different angles and perspectives, the way the meeting was debated, I think, is a credit to every one of you, and I want to acknowledge that. Yeah, the fact that we could have 8 votes and then kind of move on from that, and it showed the fresh thinking, open-mindedness to the arguments, in my view, and we were still able to go back and have a coffee and kind of yak about things in a really collegial way. So I really wanted to highlight that, and thank you to the staff. They had to endure that same marathon meeting too, and your consistent advice and patience around that was appreciated. Probably 2 other things I just wanted to go back on. I'm pleased we didn't go through line items around the levels of service. Personally, I've done that before, and it's achieved, in my view, very little result. So we could have been distracted on all the small rats and mice, essentially, of issues, and not got onto the big meaty issues. And the fact that we had so many large items to consider, I think that would have just not been good use of our time. And the only other point I wanted to add, or 2 other points. One is the OPEX. I don't know if we really got our teeth into the line of sight on those line items, and it was, I think, unfortunate when we wanted to tweak the rates and bring them down, not to have review on some of our operational commitments and reallocate them where there's new priorities emerging. So that was another point on our starting place and how we process through that. And lastly, just wanted to really highlight the significance of the rating change, moving to a 50-50 progression year on over the next 3 years to get to 50-50 with capital versus land. This is a significant milestone for the city to move away from land-based rating base, and yeah, I'm pleased that the city's been bold enough to start to move in that direction now after how the information was progressed. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, councillors. Look, I'll leave my comments. I really do want to say something, but I'll leave it till later. But I think we have done a good job with the challenges and the circumstances that have been thrown to us. So I will push back on saying that we haven't changed the dial. We've certainly attempted to, and I do appreciate that everyone put something up. And there was in one councillor's there was sacred cows around the table. So everything was put up and it was interrogated. Levels of service, I've been through that as well, and councils that did interrogate that were facing 20 to 22% rate increases year on year. We're not. And we've just got to, if somebody wants something even lower, sometimes it's just not achievable unless you want to close a library, a swimming pool, significantly sack staff, all those sorts of things. So we've just got to be realistic with some of our costs and what we do. So I'm breaking my own rules. So we will vote. Thank you. That has passed 13 votes for and 2 against. All right, we've got one more in terms of our item 8, and this is around, again, just an additional one, that council commit to further reviewing of the rating system during the 27-37 LTP process. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, colleagues. Hopefully another reasonably non-contentious opportunity this morning. As Councillor Dennison's just alluded to, quite a historic vote that was taken very recently around beginning to move away from the land value system, and I think it would be prudent that there is a review within the next long-term plan process in terms of investigating the extent to which that has gone well, the extent to which there may or may not be a case for further change, and ultimately to make sure that our rating system is serving our community well. This is one of the most fundamental questions we can ask of ourselves: who pays what? So I think regardless of whether your view was that we should have gone a bit slower or a bit faster or a bit further, or that we didn't go far enough, regardless of those individual points of view, this does deserve a review in 3 years' time. I think community awareness will be piqued over the course of those 3 years as their rating bills evolve in response to the changes that we've already put in train, and it would be most appropriate that the next council does look to review this. So I'd hope that we could actually send that next council a very clear message with a unanimous vote for this to be further reviewed during the 27-37 LTP cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I'll support this as one that didn't agree with the final decision that the majority made. I think this is catch-all, and it will highlight any consequences that may come of our decision. But I think it's a very wise thing to have a review, both looking backwards and looking forwards. So I agree with your comments. All right, councillors, no right of reply needed. We will vote. And it's passed 15 votes for, none against. All right, we will now go into part 2. And I've got a recommendation to move to part 2. for reasons of negotiations. So I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And we will vote, please. That's passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, just a couple of minutes while we prep the room.